The global CEO of RSM International, and welcome to our discussion on the power of cultural intelligence and building a diverse and inclusive culture. I am delighted to be joined by Buhle Dlamini from TomorrowToday Global. Based in Canada and South Africa, Buhle shares his experience worldwide to help leaders make the most of the future world of work, building inclusivity and managing across generations. During our time today, we're going to cover the power of cultural intelligence and how it relates to building a rich, diverse, and inclusive culture within an organization. In today's increasingly diverse global environment, cultural intelligence is no longer a nice to have, but it's a necessary skill for success in a rapidly changing world. Cultural intelligence can determine business success in areas such as leading effectively across cultures, managing across multicultural and multi-regional teams, selling to and connecting with diverse customers, attracting, retaining, and developing diverse talent, and driving innovation through diversity. Welcome, Buhle. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Jean, for having me and be part of this very important topic at this time in our world and with what we're dealing with right now.
I'm very excited about our conversation, and I really appreciate you joining. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you've been doing?
Yes, as you said there in your introduction, I have been involved in the work of helping organizations make sense of the future world of work, and with a particular focus on how organizational culture, diversity and inclusion, and cultural intelligence play into that. And so I've worked with multinational organizations across the globe, really helping them turn diversity and inclusion to be something of a competitive advantage as they work with their teams. So very exciting work.
Yeah, fantastic. What exactly when you use the term cultural intelligence, what do you mean by that? Or CQ, as I understand it's now referred to.
Absolutely. CQ really talks to the capability to be effective across multiple cultural contexts. And so in today's world, where we are dealing not only with cultural diversity, but we're dealing with generational diversity, we're dealing with gender, work styles, and organizational and other contexts, it becomes very important for people to actually have the capability to function effectively across those differences.
Yeah, really interesting. We all heard about IQ and EQ. So how does this all relate together? And how are they different?
They are very much related, and so at the same time they are very different. And so where they relate to each other is that they all measure capabilities. So they look at sort of like our abilities. And so when you think about IQ, which measures our intellect and our sort of like our reasoning ability, having one doesn't guarantee that you'll be proficient in the other two. So yeah. Take IQ, for example. So having that great intellect or that great reasoning ability doesn't necessarily mean that you'll have high EQ, which is your emotional quotient, where your ability to recognize and work with your own emotions and sort of like adjust when you work with others. And then CQ takes it a step further, where it's no longer just about your intellect, or it's not just about your emotions. It's really about how you successfully navigate differences culturally. And when we say cultural, we're not meaning only sort of like your ethnic culture. We're talking about all kinds of cultural differences. And so that's where all of these different aspects come in. So they are related to each other. The difference here with CQ, which is a big difference, is that CQ, you are able to grow over time. Unlike IQ, You know, IQ, it's what you got when you were born, and you're kind of stuck with it.
Yeah.
Whereas with CQ, you can grow that and you can develop that, and you can actually have high CQ the more you practice it and the more you engage in sort of like
Yeah.
cultural differences.
Yeah, fascinating. And we're all everywhere around the world. We're in this crazy time, this crazy, challenging time that
Yeah.
we're in. What do you have any thoughts about, is CQ more pertinent than ever because of the pandemic situation?
You know, it's very interesting what we as humans do when we are faced with crisis or we go through periods of heightened stress. What we tend to do is that our brains kick into the flight or fight mode. And so we look for threats and we look for enemies. And it hasn't been different in the COVID-19 crisis. If you look at 2020, it's been a very interesting year because with COVID-19 coming into the picture, we've started to see all kinds of issues come to the fore. Things that we haven't dealt with in a long time, we're dealing with again. And because when we are in this heightened stress, we look for those enemies. And so right now we saw an increase in cases of racially charged incidences towards people of Asian descent because of where the virus came from. And then, but as you know, as the opportunity, as we strive for opportunities, as we scramble now for resources, as this crisis continues, we start to see other targets. We start to see other targets. Minority groups become targets, and people of color become targets. Why? Because our brains go into that space where our biases come to the fore. And so CQ becomes an important aspect to engage around, especially in business, as we navigate through these times.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by this, the reality of unconscious bias.
Yes.
And I think it's so interesting, and I think that's such a big part of what we bring to every conversation and into all of our work. What are your thoughts about that, and how does that work, with the CQ?
Well, Jean, you cannot talk about CQ without talking about unconscious bias. But let me take a step back and say you can't talk about CQ without talking about bias in general. Because the first thing we have to admit is that we are all biased. So usually when I'm engaging with a live audience, I ask people to turn to a person next to them and say, you are biased. And people really get excited about being able to say that finally to someone. But the truth of the matter is that as you say that to someone else, then you realize, oh, I'm biased. Right. And the reality is that we all are. We are all biased. So that's a starting point, because to be human is to be biased. Because our brains are sort of like, we create these shortcuts that put people into the in-group or the out-group. And people in our in-group don't necessarily have to be like us, but people in our in-group have to be the people generally that we think highly of or we think positively about. They might be different from us, but the fact that we think positively about them means that we will approach them differently to the people that are in our out group. And so we have then the explicit bias. The explicit bias is where we hold attitudes and beliefs towards certain groups of people, and we're proud to hold those beliefs. We are very conscious about them. Think about pedophiles, for example. Most people have an explicit bias towards pedophiles because it's acceptable to not like pedophiles. You know, it's acceptable to say, I'm against them and rapists and all of these people. And so we have these explicit bias that we can share very freely. Whereas unconscious bias are those biases that are very subtle, that we hold in our subconscious, at a subconscious level, and they come out when we least expect them. And often they are not things we're proud of. And we see this now during this pandemic. We're seeing it in the way that people respond to things on social media. and then the unconscious bias comes out. And then all of a sudden, people are being called on the statement that they made. Some people lose their jobs and even lose their careers and leadership roles based on these unchecked unconscious biases that then pop up.
Right, right. Yeah, fascinating. And in this current environment, the business environment that we're in, what if a business doesn't pay attention to cultural sensitivity?
Oh, yeah.
And doesn't and leaders don't really mind that and take care. What do you think the impact might be?
There's a huge risk. There's a huge risk for business, and I spent some time talking to risk managers in different countries, and it's been very interesting over the last few years. I've attended and spoken to so many of these risk management conferences, and one of the biggest risks in today's world is reputational risk to the organization. Right. And most of the time, it's not the product, it's not the service that's going to cause the downfall for most businesses. It's the reputation. And it can be as simple thing as a statement made by a manager or by a representative of the organization. People don't even have to have a high profile position in the organization to actually create a risk for the organization. With social media, with videos, and with all these things that are out there, one incident of cultural insensitivity really can damage a business in such a huge way. But there's also an internal risk. We often want to focus on the external risk, but there's an internal risk to employees feeling that they're not valued, damaging relationships, distressing them, and things like that. So we mustn't always just look at the outside impact. Right. There's also an internal impact to lack of cultural sensitivity.
Right, and I think what you're saying is I would think that we need to bring that in. We need to measure it. Within our organization, we need to be very thoughtful, mindful, proactive about this, to developing this cultural intelligence within our organization and within our people and our leaders. Are you aware of any framework or any process that might be helpful?
Jean, thanks for asking. I think the CQ framework itself is an excellent one for people to understand, because it's simple and yet so powerful. Because the CQ framework looks at the 4 capabilities that you need to master in order for you to be culturally sensitive, to function effectively across cultural differences. And so the CQ wheel really has these 4. So the first one is CQ drive. The second one is CQ knowledge. The third one is CQ strategy. And then the last one is CQ action. And really to understand them. So CQ drive speaks to your motivation or your interest in engaging with people that are different from you. And so you can increase this. And then CQ knowledge really speaks to our understanding about how cultures are similar or different to one another. And so this helps us then navigate with knowledge. And then the third one, the CQ strategy, is really our awareness of our own ability to plan when we engage in multicultural context. And then the last one, CQ action, is really about our ability to adapt our behaviors, to adapt our actions when relating or when we find ourselves in those situations marked with cultural difference. And so this really gives a very easy framework for you to be able to look into and to say, okay, how do I develop my CQ drive, my CQ strategy, my CQ knowledge, my CQ action?
Okay. So utilizing that framework to then develop proactive and mindful approach to each of those.
Okay. Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's very it's personal. So
right.
I can look at myself as a leader and I can say, where do I stand when it comes to this particular group? Maybe I want to engage more with a specific group. Then I can say to myself, why am I always a little bit reticent in engaging with that group? So maybe I need to look at my CQ drive or my CQ motivation. So what can I do to increase my motivation in engaging with that group, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Okay.
I get very animated.
Fascinating, fascinating. I love it. So what can leaders do? You know, if we believe in a diverse, inclusive, culturally aware environment, and that we're living this on a day-to-day basis. What do you think we can do? What would leaders do to improve?
Yes. I think leaders do play a key role in all of this, because we know that everything rises and falls on leadership. And so when you think about RSM, when you think about any organization out there, it's going to be what the managers do that's going to determine how we navigate this time. And so leaders need to speak openly about diversity and inclusion, and speak openly about our need for cultural sensitivity. And also we need to do it in a way where it's not spoken about as a problem, but it's spoken about as an opportunity.
Right.
It's spoken about as something that we can leverage for our own success.
Yeah.
And so the entry point to this topic is quite important, because right now, the moment you say the words diversity and inclusion, people want to scream into the night and say, "Oh, I don't want to talk about this," you know. And so we got to change that. As leaders, we gotta embrace this. We got to say, this is an opportunity. This is something that's great for us, that if we get it right, we have an organization that is vibrant, that is alive, and we're able to engage with our clients in such a rich and meaningful way. And because at the fundamental level, people want to be seen, people want to be heard. And so if we as leaders are at the forefront of this, I think we can do such great things.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, not looking at it as a problem, but an opportunity. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Is there, so it's, let's say a leader is committed to this and wants to embed it into the organization. Or is there any training or coaching or reading that you would suggest that would be you'd recommend for this?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the cultural intelligence training itself is an excellent one, because what it does is that it allows a leader to sign up for the cultural intelligence training and get online assessments, so that everybody on the team can have their own assessment as to where do I stand with my CQ drive, where do I stand with all of this, and have a personal development plan and all of those kind of things, and then look at the unconscious bias. So that's an excellent tool to use. But even just before you actually have training, you can buy, there are great books on cultural intelligence that are out there. But some of us are like, oh, I don't know if I have time to delve into that right now. They are great TED Talks. I think if you are a leader and you haven't heard the name Vinay Myers when it comes to diversity and inclusion, then maybe you need to search her and go and look at some of her TED Talks. What I like about TED Talks is that they're short, they're punchy. You can watch something and you can use it. But let me just take a step back, Jean, and say, let's not lose the moment by sort of like, sometimes we want to complicate some of these things. I would just say, take the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening right now. And as a leader, you can say, okay, how can I increase my CQ drive or interest towards issues faced by Black people and racial injustice? And so what movies can I watch? How can I listen more to Black people in my circle? What books and TED Talks can I look into? How do I increase my CQ knowledge? It's about what articles am I reading and books and stuff like that. CQ strategy, think about how am I planning my engagements around this very sensitive topic right now, so that I don't get into it and then actually cause damage. And then lastly, CQ action. How do I adapt as I delve into something and then I find that actually I might have offended somebody, or I might have said something that I shouldn't have said? my CQ action or my CQ strategy should be able to say, how do I come back from that? And how do I restore the relationship? So it's an ongoing thing. So we can be trained in it. We can all do all of these good things, but also it's about our own self-reflection.
Okay. It always starts with ourselves, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So within RSM and our organization, we often talk about the significance of uniting our people around common goals, and a single vision, and so that we know which direction we're going as an organization. And what relationship do you think this has? Does this help? Is it critical to cultural intelligence?
Absolutely, Jean, because um, having a unifying purpose or a goal, it doesn't mean that you require sameness. I think often people, confuse the two, that because we are thriving towards the same goal, that then we require uniformity, where everybody is uniform and robotic. No, to achieve RSM's purpose and common goal, it really is about giving people that sense that they can fully contribute to this common goal by being fully who they are.
Right.
And so then people don't have to change who they are in order to fit into the RSM culture. People don't have to hide their differences in order to fit in. And so when people are free to be themselves, they show up fully and they make great contributions. So and I think in our leaders, we need to be drumming this up on an ongoing basis to say, let's not hide our push for common goal, common purpose. We have to push that, but in pushing that, let's invite people to be who they are and allow them to be who they are.
No, I think that's so true. And what if there's leaders? Do you have any advice for leaders that are really working on this but struggling to really get their team united and really get it embedded in the actions on a day-to-day basis?
I think every leader understands or needs to understand that when you're dealing with people, it's not always about you. You are dealing with every person that you engage in your team has had their own experiences, and they bring those experiences to your team. So they have their own suspicions about your leadership. They have their own suspicions about the organization. And so as a leader, then my suggestion is that don't be so hard on yourself. I think often leaders become very hard on themselves when there's problems within their teams. Then they sort of like say, what am I doing? Is it something that I'm doing? It is not always about you. So that's the first thing I'll just get out of the way. And then the second thing I would say, then be a learner. Be a learner leader. When you're willing to identify your own areas of growth, and as you grow, and bring your own team along. So start by asking. Don't try to be the answer provider. I like what Richard Feynman said. Richard Feynman said, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than have answers that can't be questioned. I think the era of leaders being the providers of everything, being the know-it-all, is behind us. So as a leader, seek to ask then maybe smart questions. Questions about what are we doing that maybe is not helping us to achieve our goal? What can I do differently? And so on. And so when you go in from that angle, you would find that the solutions are already in your team to make you great. And so you'll be surprised what comes out of that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Buhle, as we think about this topic, is there advice that you would have to business leaders as if they're really trying to embed this, but not finding it ingrained in their teams? What would you suggest they do?
Yeah, I think, leaders will find that as you work with people, you have to quickly learn that it's not always about you as a leader. that some of the challenges that you face in working with your teams have a lot more to do with where people have come from before they came into your team. And so people come in with their experiences, and they come into the team with suspicions about you, suspicions about the organization, and those play out in the way that they engage with each other. So I would say to leaders, first and foremost, don't be too harsh on yourself. Just recognize that if you're facing challenges in your team, it's not always because of you or because of what you're not doing right. But at the same time, with that same talking, it also is an opportunity for self-awareness, for you as a leader to ask yourself hard questions about what is it about your leadership that maybe is helping to create this situation, so that then you challenge yourself about your own biases. And so that's the starting point. And then be a learner first, be a learner leader. You don't have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers. But as we engage with people, if we're willing to learn, if we're willing to ask ourselves, what are some of the biases that I'm bringing into this space? And taking the time to ask your team. Sometimes you have to do it anonymously because they might not be willing to tell you to your face. But ask, and be a person that asks great questions. As Richard Feynman puts it, that I would rather, have questions that can't be answered than have answers that can't be questioned. So the era of leaders being the provider of all knowledge and answers, that's behind us. And so the more we create an environment where people can contribute, where we ask the questions, and we even allow them to ask questions, we'll be surprised at what will come out. And so create that space is what I would suggest.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. Right, as we close here then, Buhle, what about a quick fire summary? What would you hope the leaders take away from this, our conversation today?
5 things that I want people to take away. First, be aware of your own biases or of biases, and check them regularly. So as a leader or as a team player, ask yourself, what are my biases? And be honest with yourself. So that's the first one. Secondly, cultural intelligence is key to business success today. It's no longer something that we can sort of like relegate to some training somewhere. It is part and parcel of our everyday business. So that's the second thing. The third thing is that you can increase your CQ drive and your CQ knowledge just by educating yourself and being willing to learn more and pushing yourself into the uncomfortable spaces that will allow you to grow your interest, your drive, and your knowledge. 4, increase your CQ strategy and CQ action by planning and adapting your cross-cultural interactions. So before you go into a meeting, or before you type that email, or before whatever it is where you are going to be dealing with some difference or diversity, you have to strategize. You have to think about what you're saying. You have to think about what you're writing. You have to think about how it sounds from another perspective. And so that's how you increase your CQ strategy and CQ action. And then lastly, number 5, I would say, have an ongoing, honest conversation about where you are as an organization when it comes to inclusion. And don't be negative. Don't make it a negative conversation. Make it an opportunity conversation, and great things will happen.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Buhle, for joining me here today for this conversation. Such a fascinating topic. I'm sure that many CEOs and leaders will agree that with increased connectivity across all companies and individuals, and with global collaboration becoming more instrumental to business success, it's clear that CQ is taking on increasingly new and important significance.
Absolutely, Jean. Thank you so much for having me.
It's been really fascinating, Buhle. Thank you. Goodbye for now.
Bye.